In Ethiopia, a Nobel Peace Laureate has unleashed war on his people. Ethnic conflict is claiming more lives than the Wuhan virus in this country. Close to 250 people have died after the murder of a singer. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has failed to deliver the peace he promised. Under him, Ethiopia has returned to chaos and violence. Political challengers have been jailed. The military has been set loose. Human rights abuses continue. And digest this. This Prime Minister received the Nobel Peace Prize only last year.
Mourners by the burial site were crying as the coffin was lowered into the ground. In it lay Haacaaluu Hundeessaa, one of Ethiopia's most popular singers. He inspired a generation of Oromo, Ethiopia's largest but marginalized ethnic group. His anthems became a rallying cry during protests that overthrew the previous government. On June 29th, Hundeessaa was assassinated in the capital, Addis Ababa. Members of the Oromo community blamed other ethnic groups for the killing. Ever since, the state of Oromo has been locked in a bloody ethnic conflict. Over 200 people are dead, mostly civilians. Reports say some of the killings were carried out by military wings with hardline political views. The consequence of the Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's decision to send troops to stop the violence. Following the unrest, the government has arrested 3,500 people, including high-profile opposition leaders and members of his own ethnic group, the Oromo. The internet has been cut off. Observers say the crackdown was not just about ethnic clashes. It was political cleansing, the wiping out of the opposition. The Prime Minister even appeared in military fatigues. Remember, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for ending a war and raising hopes of democratic change. Now, under him, Ethiopia is returning to violence and chaos. Last year, Abiy's top advisor and the army chief were assassinated, so the military action has increased. According to human rights organizations, the military is still committing abuses. Many believe Abiy's democratic patience is running out, and that he may return to the strongman tactics so familiar in Ethiopia until his election. After Abiy's initial reforms, Ethiopia was hailed as the model democracy in Africa. Not anymore. Since April 2018, borders between Ethiopia's 9 ethnic federal states have been the scene of deadly clashes. Close to 3 million people have fled their homes. This makes Ethiopia the country with the highest number of internally displaced people. Was the Nobel Committee too quick in awarding the Peace Prize to Abiy Ahmed? Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
These are not really the hallmarks of somebody who's collected the Nobel Peace Prize. It's been barely 6 months since Ethiopia's Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed collected his Nobel Peace Prize. But now, his credentials as a peacemaker and as a reformer, both political as well as economic, are being questioned by his own people. In the past week, there's been an upsurge of political violence across Ethiopia, including in the capital of Addis Ababa. More than 160 people have died. This stems from the assassination of a very popular singer and political activist of the Oromo people, the largest ethnic group in Ethiopia. We don't yet know who assassinated him and why, but the Prime Minister's response to the protests was to bring in the military and order a crackdown. political opponents have been arrested, the internet has been shut down, and these are not really the hallmarks of somebody who's collected the Nobel Peace Prize. There's also been criticism from human rights groups like Amnesty International, which have pointed to a pattern of extrajudicial killings in Ethiopia. This is much more in keeping with the old Ethiopia of the repressive government that preceded, and it runs against Abiy's own message of political tolerance, of openness, of freedom of expression. This is also coming at a particularly difficult moment for Abiy Ahmed because Ethiopia is facing its first great challenge to the economic success of the past couple of years. Ethiopia is already suffering the economic consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. There have been locust swarms, giant locust swarms across all of East Africa, including in Ethiopia, which have been devastating to agriculture. Add to all of these a big foreign policy crisis. Ethiopia is now in a war of words with Egypt over a giant dam project on the Blue Nile. Ethiopia says it needs this dam to provide its people with electricity as well as have some surplus electricity to sell to its neighboring countries. Egypt is worried that the damming of the river and the filling of the dam will reduce the water flow going into Egyptian agriculture. There have been years of efforts to resolve these differences. Right now, the matter has gone up to the United Nations Security Council. There are voices in Egypt that are calling for conflict with Ethiopia if Ethiopia does not relent. So for Prime Minister Abiy, these challenges, political, economic, as well as foreign policy, are a real test of his commitment to democratic values and to his own reforms. I'm Bobby Ghosh with Bloomberg Opinion.
Nearly 200 people were killed during anti-government protests in Ethiopia last week, as the capital and other hotspots remain closely guarded by security forces and a blanket internet shutdown entered its sixth day. Large protests broke out in Addis Ababa and spread to the surrounding Oromia region on Monday night after popular Oromo musician Haacaaluu Hundeessaa was shot dead by unknown gunmen in a killing Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed said was an evil act. The government initially said 80 people had been killed during the protests, which lasted for 2 days. But a senior regional security official told Reuters on Sunday that the death toll was at least double that, with 145 civilians and 11 security personnel killed. International human rights watchdog Amnesty International has called on the government to bring Haacaaluu's killers to justice.
Right now, you have the power to amplify the voices of over 40 million people with one hashtag. In September 2016, we made a video just like this.
We wish we weren't doing this again. But here we are, and in the next few minutes, we're going to tell you exactly why.
On the night of June 29th,
Haacaaluu Hundeessaa, an iconic Oromo singer and activist,
was assassinated in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital.
a city known to the Oromo as Finfinne.
We don't know who pulled the trigger, but there are a lot of things that we do know. Like, just a week prior, Haacaaluu gave an interview on the Oromia Media Network,
where he expressed his sincere concerns regarding the current Ethiopian government.
He shared suppressed truths about Menelik II and shined a light on Ethiopia's real history.
Haacaaluu's music served as the soundtrack of the revolution during the 2016 Oromo protests.
Songs that are a continuous reminder to the Oromo that they have the right to self-determine their future.
The Oromia Media Network was raided by the military 1 day after his death, and its journalists were arrested. Over 100 people have been killed by security forces in 3 days, and with the internet shut down,
It is impossible to know what is really going on in the country.
To really understand what all this means, we need to give you more information.
About the activities of the Ethiopian government since Abiy Ahmed assumed leadership in April 2018.
Hailed for his reforms, and a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize, not long after the nation and the world celebrated his efforts, things started to change.
opposition leaders who have legal standing to operate in Ethiopia were being arbitrarily arrested and remain so today. Military command posts were set up. Beatings and killings began in Walaga, Guji and Borana, all Oromo regions.
And this following point right here is very important for you to understand.
In a country that is supposed to be a constitutional multinational federation, Abiy dissolved the multinational structure of the government.
An extremely worrisome development for the Oromo and all nations and nationalities in Ethiopia who seek self-rule and self-determination.
What we have to remember is that Abiy Ahmed is not an elected leader.
And he's made little effort to ensure free and fair elections since his appointment.
It is in this context, and in the context of an Ethiopia that sees prominent Oromos murdered, that we assert that Haacaaluu Hundeessaa was assassinated.
Over 40 million people are still in shock and in mourning.
Haacaaluu's uncle was killed by the military 2 days after his nephew's assassination.
And it's what's happening in Ethiopia right now that we must give our attention to.
Leaders of the Oromo Federalist Congress, Jawar Mohammed, Bekele Garba, Hamza Borana, and at least 35 other leaders, activists and journalists are being detained without having committed any crime.
The Makalawi prison, a notorious torture chamber that Abiy closed,
as part of his initial reform, is where these leaders are currently being illegally held.
We know they've been physically assaulted while detained. Jawar is on a hunger strike and Bekele is very ill.
2 US citizens, Redwan Aman and Yusuf Bashir, are unlawfully detained and we still don't know where they are.
We all anticipated a national reconciliation process to take place when Abiy assumed his position.
It could have happened. It could have changed the direction of Ethiopia for good. But it didn't.
And in light of this moment, for the Oromo and every other nation and nationality in Ethiopia, our demands are clear.
An independent external investigation into Haacaaluu Hundeessaa's assassination.
The immediate resignation of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed.
The end of extrajudicial killings of civilians. The release of all political prisoners.
Free and fair elections in 2020.
An end to the internet and phone line shutdown.
And finally, we demand that the international community impose immediate sanctions on Ethiopia if these demands are not met.
We will no longer be satisfied with symbolic victories.
The Oromo demand real justice.
I am Oromo.
We are Oromo.
I stand
with Oromo protests.
Do you?
Harka fuuni maatii tagadaa. Nagaan keenya bakka jirtan hundatti sinaa qaqqabu jecha like, share, subscribe gochuun irraanfatinaa galatoomaa.